Welcome everybody. We're here for episode 7 and we're very lucky to have with us Jon Cowell, who is a founding member of the club and is here to talk to us about how the club came into being and about some of the founding members that are still with the club today. And I know JC, you also dip your hand in every now and again and come along to club sessions and coach and things. So I'm looking forward to hearing all about how the club was set up and some of the interesting stories that you've got to say. So welcome, JC.
Oh, thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you for the invite. And unfortunately, I don't catch up with the club as often as I would like, but this is twice in about 2 or 3 weeks. So this is a pleasant surprise. Thank you, Georgie.
And that's even within social isolation. So you're doing all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So really, I think question number 1 is tell us how, why, when LB Tri Club started up. Can you tell us the backstory, please? We've got lots of new members now.
Absolutely, so. Absolutely. As we discussed in our preamble before you started the video, Diane will probably fill in all the dates and the details and the numbers because they elude me. But about 10 years ago, I'm guessing, eight or so years ago, I happened to be in between clubs, shall we say, and was twiddling my thumbs doing some team captaining for British Triathlon and making myself a nuisance as always, when I was approached by Triathlon England, who had a budget to increase the participation within certain regions, and I was asked if I'd attend a meeting to help set up a club in an area to be decided, with a view to me helping to establish a club. And because, as you know, I've got plenty of time on my hands, I said, of course, I'd love to come to a meeting. And that area wasn't the first choice, actually, but the area that the first meeting took place in was in Leighton Buzzard. And there'd already been a couple of inquiries from people from Leighton Buzzard to Triathlon England about where the local clubs were or why can't we have a club. And a couple of those people who'd shown an interest were also invited to a meeting. So the first meeting took place at Cedars in a rather old tatty classroom 8 or so years ago. And I met for the first time, well, actually I met Mark Leanthos, who was a local triathlete and coach who I'd known for many years before. Probably one of the first triathletes in the country. I don't think he did the first race, but he certainly was racing by about 1984. And also in that room were some a mixture of individuals who had said that they might be interested in helping put this club together, and also the regional manager at the time, whose name escapes me, I should have looked it up, who said he had a budget to play with and what did we think, and over to us to see what we could formulate. And in that room was Diane, of course, and Paul Williamson, who both of whom have been big players in establishing the club.
Yeah, I remember. Obviously, Paul was one of the first, or the first person that I interviewed, and I hadn't actually realised he'd been at that very first meeting until I did the interview with him. So, yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, very crafty, Paul. He recognised he had a skill set, but also recognised there was lots of other work to be done in other areas, and so he quickly put his hand up to be the treasurer, and then he did his very quiet thing of where he kind of didn't volunteer for anything else. I'm being quite cheeky here, but yes, but that was Paul. It was the right person at the right time. Obviously, getting an accountant as a treasurer right from the off is really quite useful, and it was a good start point.
Yeah.
Within moments, you could recognise that Diane had the perfect talent of being wonderfully communicative and wonderfully pleasant and very welcoming and very thoughtful in her answers and responses, and she just made the perfect choice for club secretary. And then it would just had to be a couple of rounds of boxing between Mark Leanthos and I to decide who was going to run the club and coach it. So we kind of, I put him down twice, and therefore I got the nod.
And so, how did that work at the very beginning? What were the considerations that you needed to make in setting up the club initially?
Well, to be fair, it was a lot easier in some respects than it had been historically. I'd set up Olney Runners some, 10 or 12 years beforehand, and I'd had to do that out of my own back pocket. And it took a few years to get that club established because there was just no money available then. And there was this young regional manager who, in hindsight, was probably under more pressure than I realised to build the triathlon representation across the country, or certainly across his region. And so he had some money to throw at us, and that was really welcome. So a couple of things logistically, we had to arrange for the pool. Without a pool, obviously, a triathlon club is a non-starter. And I've got a feeling Diane made that first approach and created that contact. And choose my words carefully here in case there's any people who work at the leisure centre listening in, tried to hang on to that contact over the years whilst their performance as a supplier, waxed and waned. So that was the first thing. Logistically, it took a little bit of organising, but then it was about how we were going to run the club, how we were going to operate it, how the coaching would take place, in what format, what sessions we would provide. And that, the logistics of that was really some conversations between Mark Leanthos and I. And they were made easier by the fact that we got a lane at Cedars quite quickly. And that allowed us to advertise the club's availability, put a date in the calendar. And as with these things, once you start, only then do you find out exactly what you need and what you're going to get. It's worth pointing out at this stage that the club I'd initially organised or created, Only Runners, I wanted it to be a free at the point of use club. So that if you paid your membership, you just rocked up and you trained. You didn't have any other money to pay, if the club didn't have any other money to pay. And we were coming into a period of time from about 2005-6 onwards, clubs were starting to be paid clubs. So you paid a membership fee to the person who owned the club, who was normally the head coach. And then the head coach took a salary out of it and had lots of volunteers running around doing lots of work for nothing, or goodwill rather. And I didn't want that. I didn't want people to have to pay to come and do a running session where the only input, wrong words, but the input was from a running coach who's obviously thought about it and created a training plan and considered what they were going to be doing and the abilities of their athletes, which is work in itself, as I'm sure you understand in your coaching capacity. But I didn't want people to have to pay when they were just going to run around Tiddenfoot Lakes, or pay when, in the middle of November when they're running hill reps on Solbury Hill. So and that was the kind of difference between Mark Leanthos and I. The decision as to whether it was going to be a let's pay the coaches club or a free at the point of use. And the free at the point of use won, partly with the support of Diane. And so we advertised, and we thought, first night, we've got a lane, we'll get 6 people, we'll go for a run, and then we'll go for a swim. And, and from that point on, we'll be singing and dancing. And I think we had something like 20 on the first night, 20 people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, can you remember anybody who was there?
Now that's a very good question. You're asking the person. See, I'm very lazy with names and with people, and when you start working with Diane, I could be even more lazy because she does all that good work. Yes, yes. No, it's a good question. I'm sure there were some notable people. I've got a feeling Brian Wright springs to mind as being one of the first people at the club, and if I'm wrong, then I apologise, and he should have been because he always needed the training. No, who else was there? Karen Pyman was a very early starter at the club, member of the club. Who else was there on the first night? Dear.
Sorry, I am asking. Yeah,
no.
That wasn't in the brief either. I just threw that one in there.
I can't remember who I coached last week, Georgie. Don't ask me things like that. Ask Diane. Diane will probably tell you exactly who turned up and which groups they went.
Diane will still have the register, I'm sure.
Yeah, she will. She will. Yeah, absolutely. Which is actually good skills. It's good skills to know all that.
So
sadly, I can't. But,
that's all right. How did you decide on Thursday nights as the club night? Because obviously that's historical now.
Pool availability.
Okay.
I think. Yeah. I think it was pool availability. I don't think, I had any burning ambition for it to be Thursday night. I probably had a burning ambition for it not to be Friday night. Quite probably. How did it come to Thursday? Pool availability, I'm sure. That's what happened, and then it was just more convenient to do the run and the pool at the same time, because the pool was always been late. It was still 9 o'clock, I take it. It's still, okay, it's not ideal, but we managed to work that, get the run in, and then get to the swim. It's not necessarily the best of solutions, but it works, and it has been made to work quite quickly. I honestly can't remember whether we had 1 lane or 2 lanes on that first night. I've got a feeling we stretched to 2 lanes. We had 1 booked and they gave us 2 because we had too many people for it, which is the problem as we've always had at the club. But yeah, that was it. And I'm guessing every Thursday night since then we've had a club training session.
Yeah, I mean that's it's amazing when you think 8, 9, 10 years ago, and still Thursday nights are our club night. We encourage new members to come, and that's the night we say. And I think it's fantastic. And equally with the cycling, how did you go about introducing the cycling and on Sundays, and was that set from the beginning? Or?
The cycling came a bit later. I suppose it's worth sharing this. One slightly funny anecdote. I was teaching in Watford at the time, and because we'd started another club, I thought I ought to get fit. So I was cycling up and down the canal towpath I'd moved to Woburn, so I was cycling the canal towpath and then across to my new house in Woburn, and I was desperately late for one of these early meetings. We had about 3 or 4 meetings before the club started, by the way, just so you know. There's quite a few things to iron out. And I was hammering down this towpath one night, and there were a couple of dog walkers coming the other way and another cyclist. And I didn't particularly want to slow down. I tried to give this cyclist a wide berth. And as I went towards the canal, my front wheel went up onto the lip of the edge of the canal, and the brickwork just took it into the canal. And so my bike just slowly slid into the canal, following it. And I took a nosedive through all the stingy nettles and then into the canal. And I rocked up at the meeting about 5 minutes late, covered from head to foot in stingy nettles and smelling slightly curious of the Grand Union. So how did the cycling start? Not with me, I think, is the answer to that. The cycling came in. One of the things that I've been quite successful with previous clubs I've worked in, not just with Olney Runners, but I was chairman of Cyprus Triathlon for a few years, and we had a club in Akrotiri. And it was back then I used to really work for a living, honestly. And I found there was too much work to arrange all the training and everything. And so I nominated 3 people, 1 person to be in charge of swimming, 1 person to be in charge of cycling, 1 person to be in charge of running. And that was fine in the military because these people just ran away with it. And you did, as a role, as a chairman, I didn't really have much work to do. They just got on and did it. And I looked good at all the awards ceremonies and, got all the pats on the back. So it was a program that worked well for me.
Win-win,
and yeah, absolutely. So I tried to introduce that at Olney when we went from Olney Runners to Olney Multisport. And it kind of worked in a small way. But the club was never fully, because it'd been a running club, an athletics club, it never fully committed to multisport. And so I was really keen to introduce that at Olney, Leighton Buzzard. And we did that quite quickly, quite soon. It would, because of our growing numbers, because of the fact that the scale of the club was getting out of hand, it became useful to kind of give those disciplined heads the freedom to go and run with it. And that started quite quickly. So we'd had some casual cycling, some occasional rides. I'd led one winter, and we had such a mixed ability group that straight away we realized that well, as a coach, I was under pressure to try and coordinate that and control that, and straight away we realised that we needed lots and lots of helpers, and this is where the club suddenly took off, because we found we had within its ranks some wonderful people, full of energy, full of enthusiasm, full of desire to learn to be coaches, and with a little bit of support, perhaps a little bit of confidence from giving them the freedom to go and play, they've developed into great coaches. And bam, lo and behold, you've got half a dozen bike coaches, half a dozen swim coaches, and half a dozen run coaches, and that's seen us very proud over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean that's a fantastic legacy when you think about it, and when you think you started from that first meeting to then sort of 20 people on the first night, to then growing it, and then actually growing the club by growing the coaches and developing a sort of roadmap of the coaching training sessions that are available to club members.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. But absolutely. But the whole thing only hangs together if the plan works. And if people don't volunteer to become coaches and don't see that there's some benefit from doing so, both for the club and for themselves, perhaps with their own personal development or their own work development, then you can't create another group. And if you can't create another group, you don't get the next 6 or 8 members to come and stay. It is, and that's not to say we haven't always got it right. There were times, particularly in the first few months, where people came and they only came for one session, and then you never saw them again, and we didn't have a feedback loop. And it was very hard to work out, well, did we put them off? Was it too fast? Did they think we weren't friendly enough? And not friendly enough is a tough one, because Diane was just superbly welcoming to everybody who's ever dawned on Leighton Buzzard. So yeah, it all looks good in hindsight, but at the time there was a lot of paddling going on under the water, I can assure you. It's just you tend to forget some of the stress and some of the harder logistics of it all, and just reflect on the fact that the club just grew exponentially.
So what did those first sort of training sessions look like? Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, that's fine. What did they look like? Again, you're asking the wrong person. If I go back, actually, I've probably still got the files on them. So what did they look like? The first run we went out around the Tiddenfoot Lakes, around the gravel lakes, and we did an interval set. So we did some repetitions and some intervals there. I think we split up into 2 groups, Mark and I leading a group each once we were there. The first swim session was really, let's take a look at what we've got. Yeah. And for many people, it was the first time in the water in inverted commas, a coach session. So it was good for Mark and I to give some individual feedback where we could. And one of the things I think about a lot and try and implement in my work is I'm quite a reflective coach. I like to see people over a period of time before I start to give feedback. One of the weaknesses of coaching is the fact that there's this huge expectation on coaches to make you brilliant straight away, to see what's wrong and prescribe something, and oh, your hand entry is here and I'd like your hand entry to be here, and that's a part fix to one problem. But unless you understand why that hand entry is there, you can't really fix the problem. And if the hand entry is here because their rotation is wrong, and you fix the hand entry, and then you've got to go back and fix the rotation, you've now got to change the hand entry. So being a reflective coach is really quite important, and being somebody who can step back and evaluate why you're doing something and make sure it's the right approach is really important. And yet when you are poolside, you feel the immense pressure of those 6 or 8 eager faces looking up at you saying, fix my stroke. It's, you feel obliged to give feedback. And I think Mark and I fell into that trap early on, where we were trying to fix everything very, very quickly. So, these are the mistakes you make when you're under pressure as a coach, and you try and have to learn a strategy to get around that. So I can't remember what the swimming session was. I do have it. I will look it up for you.
Oh yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I know. It's. I'm sure it was a very broad warm up, few drills, a number of reps with increasing intensity, and perhaps and then during that period giving some individual feedback, and then some specific drills to focus on. Though arguably that's a traditional start point for any swimming session.
I think what's great, one of the things that I'm hearing and is coming through is your passion for coaching. Yeah. Oh, well done. That I think when people join the club, one of the things that people do like is the fact that the sessions are coached and not just swimming. I think swimming is a natural thing to be coached in. But the run coaching, I think, has really taken off, as has the cycling.
No, absolutely.
I think over the years that's really developed.
Yeah, for sure, and it's developed far more than I ever thought it could. I mean, I'm a different coach in 2020 than I was in 2012, and I'm sure it's 2012, so it must be 8 years. It must be 8 years now. So it's Olympic year. So yeah, there you go, 2012.
I wondered if it was a
Yes.
legacy club, actually.
No, it
No,
wasn't. But there
before.
was some money around at the time. Uh, because Triathlon England just happened to chance upon some Sport England grants. Actually, remind me in a minute, and I'll come back to the money aspect of it, because there's another little anecdote that that's quite important. But from the coach, yes. So I'm a different coach today than I was 8 years ago. I've come a long way. But I'm proud to think that perhaps some of my imprint of coaching still survives within Leighton Buzzard. I'm from what I see, they've taken it further than I ever thought they could. But as I'm sure you're aware, I see running as a skill, and I was quite keen that we learned how to run effectively, in the same way that I'm very keen that we learn how to swim effectively, and ultimately we learn how to cycle effectively as well. And I wanted that term, being coach, to really mean something. When you are a coach, you do an awful lot of facilitation of sessions. You prescribe a session, and in that hour you do a few minutes of coaching, but most of it is you're facilitating a session. The actual coaching aspect of it, there's no real definition academically. There's no true definition of coaching. It's one of those things that people get grants to write a paper about and try and prove, and they take the money, thank you very much, and prove nothing. But there's no true definition of coaching, but I see it as when you're actually intervening and providing a set of tools to an athlete to improve their skill of performing something. And if you go to many clubs where you expect to be coached, you will get some swim coaching, but very rare that you get any running coaching at all, and very rare that you get any specific cycling coaching. And so that part of the developing the club was part of my own academic journey as a coach as well, my own learning as a coach, and up to a point I was able to use Leighton Buzzard Tri far more effectively to learn more about my own coaching and what works and what doesn't work than I was in any of the other work that I've done historically. It was just an environment where people were very receptive to new thoughts and ideas. It was an environment where the coaches were very receptive to new thoughts and ideas. And it was an environment where the coaches were very skilled and hungry for more information and more learning, and that allowed me to drip feed more. And once I'd stepped back, which was a hard decision to make, and maybe we'll come back to that later, they took those responsibilities on further. And I'm immensely proud. Every time I look at what Leighton Buzzard does, I'm immensely proud about it. I don't have a big ego, but the bit of ego I do have is really pleased, when I see people standing on the podium at European Championships and World Championships, and Joe Parker on the podium last year, Sharky Larkins on the podium as well last year, winning gold.
Yeah.
What a fantastic performance. What a fantastic race they both had. Very pleased to see it. We still need to work with Andrew Pryke and his ability to drink 4 pints of lager after a European Championship. He's stuck on 3 at the moment, and I'm willing to help him out.
Oh, are you? Okay. You're willing to put some training in there then?
I am. If he funds it, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'm sure when he watches this. So go back to your anecdote about the funding for the club.
Oh, right. Yes, of course. Nearly forgot this. So I can't remember what the funding was. It was probably about £3,000 or £4,000. Again, Diane probably, actually Paul's probably still got the accounts, and with some little notes, bullet points that he's put on it. JC still hasn't provided the money or something like that. We got a free pool. That was the first thing. They paid for the pool lane for like 6 months. And they promised to pay for the pool lane. This is Triathlon England. Promised to pay the pool lane for the first 6 months. And then when we said we need 2 lanes, we managed to badger the guy to promise to pay 2 lanes for 6 months. And, things like that. They paid for the website. They paid for, other admin charges and things. I think actually they paid our first membership fee. So, it was a few £1,000s worth of money. And then this chap, bless him, who was a Triathlon England regional manager, was left his job in a hurry, shall we say, with lots of unfulfilled promises, and then the money wasn't forthcoming.
Oh.
And although we had been charging a still well, then a nominal fee. I'm not sure what you charge for swimming now, but we charged, I don't know, £2 or £3
I
a
think
week
it's
for swimming.
£3. I don't think
It's
it's.
still
I don't think it's
£3 with 8
changed.
years
Yeah.
on. I mean, that's fantastic. Um, we we just didn't have the money to pay all the bills that we had, so it took some unraveling with Triathlon England and a lot of not a lot. I think it's several arguments, 2 or 3 arguments I had with the chap who then took over all of the team managers, and he's a very chilled chap, and I get on with him in all other circumstances, but he didn't understand the not the stress so much, but the pressure of having assured everybody had given up their time and volunteered and wanted to help make the club what it's become. Having promised them that Triathlon England were a great organisation to be supportive of and would come up with the goods. I felt a bit embarrassed by the fact that they hadn't, and also I was then thinking, well, hang on a minute, who's now going to have to dip their hand in their pocket to cover this? And it was looking as though it was probably going to be me, and so I wasn't very happy. So I had some choice words with Triathlon England, oddly enough, because I'd done all that before with Only Runners, and I wasn't
Right.
about to. Well, I suppose I could have done it again, but it might not have gone down too well at home.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can understand that. So, what are some of your favourite memories of the club over the years?
Well, if I said the first night, you think I'm lying because I can't remember it enough. What are my favourite memories? Going home on the first night, having actually walked out of that pool changing area with Diane and thought, actually, this wasn't a disaster. People came, because it takes a lot of work, takes a lot of effort to get the ball rolling. So that's a very fond memory, although it fades. Every time I've attended the club race has been a fond memory, and sharing beers afterwards, cheering people across the line and seeing people race and seeing the enthusiasm with which they race. But fundamentally, it comes down to alcohol, having a few beers afterwards with the club and the volunteers and the people who make that happen. Absolutely fantastic, or fantastically well organised, well spirited, very competitive, fantastically good for the community event that unfortunately won't be happening this year.
I was going to say it's really sad that it's not going to be happening this year.
It is.
I know
sad.
Steve had put in a lot of work already and was taking on the mantle really well from.
Absolutely
Chris,
tough act to follow, and as a lot of these positions are. So what else? Seeing the coaches grow. Seeing people volunteering to become a coach, and then sense where they're at in their heads, and am I good enough to do this? Because there's always this quandary, my swimming's not quite good enough. How on earth can I coach? I'm not a very good runner. Could I really be a coach? There's always that going on in the back of every coach's head. But thankfully, but I think because we've created the right environment, watching people step up to that challenge, feeling though they're supported enough to be able to do it. And then lo and behold, 3 months later, running their lane or running their group or leading their bike session with the confidence of an established coach with years of history, and developing athletes as a result. That always works for me. Seeing people racing for the first time, so that's positive. Seeing people win, I don't see the winning as being any greater than the racing for the first time, but it's always nice when we have people stepping on the podium. Watching club members race for Team GB, obviously, outstanding sense of pride, and I'm there in the crowd going, he's in my club, she's in my club. So I think everybody knows. It's multiple things, sessions that I've led that I'm pleased with, which don't happen that often because I'm too critical maybe, but when I'm driving home reflecting, how did that go? If I think, those smiling faces in the pool, being able to give feedback to people that I hope that they understand and they can utilize. The thank yous I get, I still get messages from people that, you did this way back. I mean, actually, Sharky, after she'd won the Worlds, Colin did a fantastic job of coaching her. I'm very pleased for Colin, very pleased for Anna. And she said, did you know you coached me to run back in 1978? No, that's not true. Anna's never that old, but early days of the club, she would have been, when I was still leading run sessions. She came to many of the sessions. I do remember her as a runner, but never envisaged her standing on the top step of a podium at the European Championships. Not that I doubted her ability, but if you listen to her podcast, she doubted her own ability, remarkably. Oh, Georgie, multiple things. It's sustained. The club has sustained me for the last 8 years. So keep it up, please, guys, because I love to see what you're doing.
Oh, brilliant. I mean, I always remember first starting in the club, and you were coaching the beginner group, so to speak, and coming out with you, and actually, like I say, being coached running for the first time ever. But equally, I managed to work out quite quickly that I could get you talking. And thereby have a little rest.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a good tactic. If you ever want to extend the rest, just ask the coach another question. Yeah, absolutely. But you're always happy to talk, particularly about myself, Georgie. That's fine. And well, there
No,
you
it was
go.
about running. It was about running.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. So there you go. How could I forget? Notable memory. Your first session.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was fishing for. You see.
Damn. You see, now if the interview went on for 3 or 4 hours, we would have got to you. All right.
Yeah, we would. So what's your funniest memory to do with the club over the years? Have you got one?
Other than falling in the canal?
Other than falling in the canal, yeah, I suppose.
In front of an audience and then having to attend a meeting dripping wet. Funniest memory of the club? Oh, I don't know. No, I don't honestly know. These things don't come back to me so readily.
All right, we'll take the falling in the canal.
No,
then. We'll take the falling in the canal.
Yeah, for funny normally means that there is a fall guy. For any joke to work, somebody has to lose. Somebody has to, and my embarrassing moment was the falling in. There have been so many happy memories. There's been so many good. I met the swim run crew when I was in the Lake District a couple of summers ago, and I met them for. I think we had a chili or something, and they were just, the banter was just stratospheric. I think it was the night before the swim run, and they were probably on their 6th can of lager or something. There were about 8 of them sharing a 2-bed apartment, and it was just wonderful. The jokes and the gags, and the whole spirit was just wonderful. Wonderful.
Oh, brilliant. Well, it brings me on just a little bit then to think, if you can think about you on a personal note, as opposed to the club. I'm going to ask a few of the old favourite questions in terms of, if you're thinking about your own training session, what would your favourite training session be?
My favourite training session is always the one I've just finished. My least favourite training session is always the one I'm about to do.
Do you know what? That's exactly what Nick Taylor-Comer said as well.
Is it really? Well, there you go. Yeah. Well, there you go. He's a bootneck. What do you expect? Yes, it's. I get a huge amount of satisfaction when I have completed a hard training session. And I really, really, although I haven't done them to any high intensity for a while now, I really like hard fartlek sessions when you're not in control of the pace. So somebody else has now taken over and is running as far and as fast as they want for a period of time, and you're no longer in control, and you've got to challenge your mind and your body to work at somebody else's pace. I find them intolerably hard. I find them psychologically a real battle. But the satisfaction and the exhilaration I get from doing those kind of sessions buoys me all the way until I've had my first pint of Guinness. But I also like the discipline of interval training, repetitive training, whereby you are running at not necessarily a set pace, but at an even pace of 400-meter reps. The bread and butter of a good triathlete is 12 times 400 meters off 2 minutes. And if you can run 105 to 110 with a 55 or 50-second recovery and go out and do a same rep again. That's a high standard of
I was going to say,
running.
yeah.
Yeah, well, but they're the tough sets. If you can do those, if you can do those, you get a huge amount of physiological return from them. They're psychologically as challenging as they are physiologically challenging, but they're the real sets that get you buzzing. They're the sets I really enjoy.
I was going to say,
I have. Sorry,
go on.
go on. Well,
No,
I get less satisfaction from doing that on the bike. I find that I'm hampered by my own psychological weakness on the bike. So once I've lost the pace on the bike, I find that really, really hard. And I've only ever been a one-pace swimmer. So, I can do 50-meter reps quite quickly, but not prettily. But, 200-meter reps, 100-meter reps, 200-meter reps, 400-meter reps. Oh, dear God. Every consecutive one leaves me with less satisfaction than the last.
I do always remember that. Yeah, you didn't really like swimming very much. You do it because you have to do it.
No, I love swimming. No, Georgie,
you
I
love
absolutely
swimming.
love
Oh,
swimming.
okay.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong. I enjoy
did
swimming.
get you
I'm not
wrong
a fan of swim. Well, I'm not a fan of swimming in the pools. I managed to break my nose a couple of times when I was in the army, and I had a real problem with chlorine. I lived in Cyprus for a few years and was racing quite well out there. And then when I came back to the UK in the early 90s, I suddenly found that I had an allergic reaction to chlorine. So every time I went swimming, I had a cold for the next 24
Oh,
hours. And then
no.
I went swimming again, and I had a cold for the next 24 hours. And in the end, they cauterized my nose, but it didn't completely cure it. But it really put me off pool swimming. So I was swimming in Southport the other day. You give me a sea swim or a lake swim or a river swim, and I'm happy as Larry. But it means I can avoid those hard intervals of going up and down the pool all the time.
That's what it is
Yeah,
then. That's what it is.
No, absolutely. I'm a lazy swimmer. I enjoy swimming. I'm just not very good. Just not very good at it.
I don't believe that for a second.
Oh no, trust me.
What's the one piece of kit you wouldn't live without?
My
From the
treasured
obvious.
wine glass.
Oh, okay, then, yeah.
No, the one piece of kit I wouldn't live without. I don't know actually. I've had my time trial bike for maybe 12 or 13 years, and I just grown accustomed to it. And every time I've thought about changing it, I keep thinking, well, it fits me, it works. If I'm clever enough to point it in the right direction and sensible enough to do some training, then actually, it will get to where I want to be a bit quicker. But then I'd only replace it with what I've got. So I do like my time trial bike, which was just the luxury of having worked in the industry at the time. No, I don't have any one specific piece of kit beyond that. A good pair of swimming goggles when they're not leaking. That's my loveliest piece of kit. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
pair of goggles that work. Yeah.
That's a good shout, actually. Yeah, that's a really good shout.
And so short anecdote then is I was racing in a series in Hillingdon, which was a Wednesday evening series back in the 80s, I think. And I used to drive from work like a lunatic to get there 5 minutes before the start and throw my bike. And actually, it was a swim run bike back then, off the top of my head. Anyway, I'm running towards the swim start, and I'm in my wetsuit, and I've just got my swim hat on. I'm trying to put my goggles on, and we're about a minute from the start. And just as I get in the water, I put my goggles down, and the strap broke.
Oh,
And
no.
I thought, oh, for God's sake. And I knew I didn't have a spare pair of goggles, but there was a stand every week at this race. Every time it was there was a stall, one of the, shop stall.
Yeah.
And he always had goggles. So I said to the starter, look, put me goggles, just hang on a minute. And pleasingly, he did. And I ran towards this store. And the stall holder saw me coming, waving my goggles. So he hid all the cheap pairs of goggles. And then the last pair there were a pair of Iron Man goggles. And bearing in mind, this is something like 1988. They cost me 50 quid. And yeah, no, absolutely. And I promised to pay him later. But I got these goggles and I put them on. I'm adjusting them. And I was sweating now in my wetsuit. And the starter started the moment I got in the water. They were brilliant goggles. They were fantastic goggles, and I used them for the next couple of years until my bloody dog chewed them.
No.
Yes, Millie, you naughty dog.
Well, mind you, that 50 quid then was well spent
Oh,
at
absolutely.
that
And of
time.
course, foolishly, I didn't go and buy another pair. So that's the other piece of advice. If you find a piece of kit that works, go and get a second piece. So you've always got one on standby.
Yeah,
Never been able to replace them. I
that
really
is
struggle with goggles.
a good
Yeah.
tip actually. They're a good tip. So I think I'm going to skip to who in the triathlon community has influenced you the most, why and how?
Okay. So I'll touch on something I said with Colin the other day. I'm just going to twitch my curtain if you forgive me. I don't like
Yeah,
to
that's
shut
fine.
out the sun, but it's a beautiful evening sun. And I live near the Chevin now in Derbyshire, and it's just stunning outlook here. It's hard, just not my office just looks out over this
Oh,
beautiful piece
wow.
of countryside, but the sun's such an irritant. So when I qualified for Team GB age group for the first time, which was at the World Long Distance Triathlon in Fredericia in Denmark, I rocked up there, and back then the Team GB team was small. I think we might have had about 30 people. So the 5 or 6 of actually the elites are probably 6 or 8 of those numbers, and the rest were age groupers. And I got to the hotel, and actually my bike was delayed, which was a bit of a bind. But I went down for breakfast the next day, and everybody sat at the same table, and I'm at this table that just mixture of very talented age group athletes and also the elite team, and so there were this group of people like Annie Emerson and Bella Comerford, Bella Bayliss now as she is, and Sarah Gross and Jess Straskow Pedersen and Michelle Parsons and Mark Mackay and Ollie Mott and oh dearie me, who else? Phil Mosley, and these are all elite athletes. And then they say, well, hello, JC, and what training you've been doing and what kit have you got? And I'm thinking, bloody hell, you don't want to do what I've been doing. I've been drinking too much Guinness, and what have you been doing? And they were wonderful. They were really interesting and interested. They took me under their wing, as they did all the people in the team, and they looked after me and made sure I was ready to go, and went out on the warm up with them before the race, which was actually a bit of a mistake because I couldn't keep up. But they were really, really encouraging, and showed me the benefits of being in that team, and B also showed me just how wonderful the community was in triathlon. I always known it had been quite good, but I never realised that how close knit everybody was. And I qualified again the next year, and it was the same group, plus or minus 1 or 2 people, and I got to know them better. And over the years, they created an environment that you just had to want to go and participate with. Now the team's got bigger, the whole process of age group races got massive now compared to what it was. But it was that whole environment whereby they genuinely wanted to know what you've been up to and what you're doing next and what training you're doing, and do you want to, we're going away for a 6-week block of training, do you want to come with us, things like that.
It
It
sounds
was just
quite
wonderful.
inspiring. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And even a lazy person like me did some training for a while, and so for 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 or 7 years, I kind of actually focused on what I was doing rather than just enjoying it. And so they were probably the most inspirational to me, and probably the people that helped me to get the most out of myself from a performance perspective. And I still obviously enjoy going with the teams. Obviously, as an athlete, I don't do that so much now, but as a team manager. But equally, I'm inspired by everybody else. So I've been watching and following quite closely some coaches at Olney Runners who have been doing some cave cares during this lockdown, and the training that they had been doing as a participation event every week, they've now been doing online throughout the whole of the series. And I look at it and I think I mentored that coach, and I'm really proud to see what she's doing. And similarly, when I look at what Leighton Buzzard Try are doing, I just think that the percentage of my part and involvement in it is enough to inspire me to want to keep being involved. And gives me the, you know, the again, that small ego that keeps creeping in with me. The satisfaction that I got some of the things right. They're the things that inspire me, Georgie.
Well, just keep coming back to us, JC, and sharing
Well, I
all
try.
that
I
knowledge and
try.
understanding. You are quite far away now, but you know,
I am,
it's
sadly.
always
Yes.
great
Yeah.
to see you. So, yeah, what we'll have to do, I think, there's been a running theme through this interview. It seems to involve Guinness, red wine. So I think what we need to do is combine it with an overnight stay and a trip to the pub when they're open.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm always up for that. You know how weak-willed I am until it comes to alcohol, and then I can contend with the best.
And then you might remember some more anecdotes as well. So,
Well, they keep popping back talking to you. I won't keep boring your audience with all of them, but you know, this is the point about triathlon. It's just full of memories. You know,
yeah.
mostly good, some not so good. You know, I've had my ups and downs within the sport as an athlete and as a coach, but they're mostly ups, which is why I've stayed in it. And okay, the business is under big pressure at the moment. Obviously, I think lots of businesses are, but you know, whoever thought that I could make a living out of sport and triathlon? You know, I actually, you don't know, I was drunk when I did my first triathlon. So, you know, this drinking has a theme. It seems to be consistent through the
I
whole.
don't. I have this feeling you're not the only member of the club for that to be the case either.
Well,
Maybe
yeah, but
calming the nerves.
I would push them hard to be as drunk as I was. I can assure you.
Okay.
I nearly got pulled out by the marshals.
So that's what not to do in a race. That was one of the questions. What not to do
Absolutely,
in the race.
absolutely. Yeah. No, well, but it. Um, so actually, so there you go. If there's one person I would like to meet, I'd like to meet lots of people. I'd like to meet lots of people again. But if there's one person I'd like to meet, it's the person who saved that race. Because if she hadn't have done what she did, I would have probably quit, and I never would have done another triathlon. So very briefly, I was serving in Belfast, and every year paratroopers, airborne forces have a reunion, and it's a big piss up in Aldershot, and all the old and bold come back, and everybody gets horribly drunk over the weekend. And I was in Belfast working with a second Queen's Regiment, I think, off top of my head, two Queens. And I put in a leave pass, and the sergeant major turned it down. He wouldn't let me go back because he didn't like me particularly because I was a paratrooper and he wasn't. So I think in a sense there was a little bit of jealousy there. So he wouldn't let me go back, and I was a bit miffed, and you know, got on with my patrolling and my job. And then I saw a notice on a notice board that said they were taking a team back for the Army Triathlon Championships, and it was on Sunday, the whatever of July. The first Sunday in July, and Airborne Forces weekend's always the first weekend in July, and it had a little movement detail that said we'll cross over Larne to Stranraer on the Friday, and then we're racing on the Sunday. I thought fantastic. The race was at Sandhurst, which is just up the road from Aldershot. I'll join the triathlon team. I'd done a bit of swimming when I was young. I could run. I had a bike. I'll go and get drunk with my friends on Friday and Saturday, and then I'll go and do this thing called a triathlon. And so I got back. I got horribly drunk on a Friday night. I got horribly drunk all day Saturday. The team came to wake me up on the Sunday morning because I was still fast asleep, and they kind of hosed me down and got me in the van and drove to the race start. But the boss wasn't very happy because I really was in a bad way. We did a swim in the ornamental lakes in Sandhurst, and it was freezing cold. And back then, you just swam in your cycle shorts, so you know it was it's like having drag shorts on by the time you got around the swim. And I was freezing when I came out of the swim. Got into transition, tried to put a shirt on, and was struggling. But I got my shirt on, grabbed my bike, and I got stopped in transition and told I had to buy a helmet. Because I had to get a helmet because we didn't know the rules back then, and so I had to go and buy so second time I had to buy something in a race, I had to buy a helmet, which was then a bunch of fives, the old banana helmet.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get on my bike, and I just couldn't hold my bike still to get my leg over, and I finally did, and I got on it, and I was wobbling and weaving down the road, almost hitting the barriers as I went. And this young lady, bless her, she cycled alongside, and she got hold of my arm, and she cycled with me whilst I warmed up, and she cycled with me for about 10 Ks and just held on to me, while I was trying to get some energy and heat into my system, and get rid of the alcohol. And we got to about 10Ks, and I warmed up, and thank you, and off I went, of course. And I warmed into it, and I started to overtake people, and got onto the run, and overtook more people. And I thought, oh, well, this is okay. If I did this sober, I might be quite good at this. And so I didn't come last, but I got to the finish, and I waited at the finish to thank this young lady who had helped me out, and I didn't see her. So I checked the results, and they didn't have a list of anybody who hadn't finished, so I couldn't find her or track her down. And so I was never able to thank her, but without her helping me around, I probably wouldn't have finished, and I wouldn't have done my first triathlon, and wouldn't have ended up doing this as a career. So there you go. Yes.
Yeah,
but
that's quite powerful.
But children, don't do triathlon drunk.
No, please don't.
No,
Please don't. Keep
no,
safe.
not with
Keep safe,
swimming.
everyone.
Oh,
No,
it was
no,
hideous.
definitely
It
not.
was hideous.
Definitely not.
Don't
Well,
recommend it.
JC, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing all your wonderful knowledge about how the club was started, all your anecdotes and stories, and all the things that you've learned. Thank you for sharing those with us. And
Absolute pleasure, Georgie. I'm
it's been
delighted
great.
to spend some time with you. I'm delighted to see you as the team captain, and
Thank you.
really, really pleased that you're doing the role. And hard act to follow with Coach K, obviously.
Yeah.
But you stepped up really well, and as everybody has done with the club. But all I recommend now is that you get Paul and you get Diane, and Diane will say no. There were 16 people on the first night, and Paul will tell you how much. All right.
Diane, I'm after you.
Yeah, absolutely. Come on, missus.